Welcome. We start in Brazil, where citizens in Rio de Janeiro are coming together to begin reconstruction of its national museum. The museum burned down on Sunday night, destroying 200 years of priceless artifacts.
The building that housed Brazil's National Museum survived the fire that destroyed 90% of the artifacts inside. Nearly 20 million pieces spanning millions of years of existence were lost. The academic community has promised to continue reconstruction efforts.
Porque no solamente es historia de Brasil lo que se ha perdido.
We didn't just lose Brazilian history. We lost artifacts representing millions of years of human history, like fossils, indigenous artifacts, and ancient insects.
De fósiles, de lenguas indígenas.
One of the biggest losses was the oldest human fossil in the American continent, Egyptian mummies, along with countless archaeological and geological collections that told the history of the continent's original people.
This was an attack on our memory, on our history, on the original languages of Latin America. It's very serious, one of the worst attacks on the history of the indigenous people.
The National Museum is part of the University of Rio de Janeiro, which has faced large budget cuts since 2015. They've only become worse since President Michel Temer came to office. He cut the museum's budget by nearly $20 million.
It's not just the museum. The whole country is being affected by this perverse logic of budget cutbacks. We have started to mobilize, trying to show our reality, to inform people to fight these policies. To destroy Rio's university is to destroy the nation itself. It's destroying our future.
One of Michel Temer's first measures was a constitutional amendment that froze public investments for 20 years, greatly affecting culture and education.
I think there has to be political compromise so we as a nation can revoke these measures, because education, health, culture and even science are being eradicated.
The Brazilian people will not hold anything back in their efforts to see the museum be rebuilt. They also say they will take to the streets to demand that the constitutional amendment that froze public spending for 20 years be repealed.
Now, the former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's electoral campaign has gone up in smoke. A Supreme Court judge rejected a final appeal by lawyers for the jailed former president. That means the frontrunner in all the polls is now almost certainly out of the race. His running mate, Fernando Haddad, will replace him as the Workers' Party candidate. Meanwhile, far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro was stabbed during a campaign rally in the state of Minas Gerais. A 40-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the attack. Bolsonaro was rushed to hospital after suffering massive blood loss and injuries to his stomach. Doctors say he is stable, but it could take 2 months for him to fully recover.
He is already awake. He is breathing spontaneously, and we are now taking the necessary precautionary measures to prevent any infection or new bleeding. The usual post-operative care after a serious trauma like the one he suffered.
Some of Bolsonaro's supporters held a vigil for him in Sao Paulo. The former military officer has built his campaign on an appeal to right-wing nationalism. He opposes abortion and gay rights and promises to fix the Brazilian system. Last week, he pretended to hold a gun and threatened to shoot members of Lula's Workers' Party. Other supporters gathered outside the hospital. His son said the stabbing will only boost his campaign.
He is stronger than ever. He is conscious. He is talking, ready as always. To those who wanted to destroy a family man, Brazil, you've just elected your president. He will be in the first round.
Brazil's former president, Dilma Rousseff, strongly condemned the attack, but said that he was the one who'd been stirring up hatred. In 2016, as Rousseff was being impeached by Congress, Bolsonaro praised the officer who had tortured her during the military dictatorship.
I think it's awful, but I think that encouraging hate creates that kind of attitude. You cannot say that you're going to kill anyone, especially if you are a presidential candidate.
Rousseff made the remarks as she visited her predecessor, Lula da Silva, in prison. She said the court's decision to bar him as a candidate is absurd.
I do not cry in front of the enemy. I didn't cry during my time in jail. I didn't cry during my torture. I do not cry. Now, when it comes to President Lula and this absurdity, I think it's more than injustice. There is no greater injustice than condemning an innocent person, and for him, I cry. I remember him and I cry.
Talvez seja a palavra mesmo injustiça. Não há justiça maior do que você condenar uma pessoa inocente. Com ele eu choro.
Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Limas, has more.
Así es, saludos estudios, surgen las primeras repercusiones después.
There's been an immediate reaction to the decision by Supreme Court Judge Edson Fachin to reject the appeal by Lula's lawyers. They wanted the resolutions of the United Nations Human Rights Committee to be respected. Those had asked the Brazilian state to guarantee Lula's right to be a candidate. Brazil's electoral court had already voted against the UN position on Friday and ruled Lula ineligible as a candidate, even though he has consistently led the polls. Many Brazilians, the social movements and the left here, have reacted quite negatively to Fachin's latest ruling. They say it's contradictory, because he is the judge who, during the vote by the Electoral Court on Friday, had supported the United Nations request, which the Human Rights Committee in Brazil has said should be binding. Now, Edson Fachin has reversed his position and refused the appeal by Lula's lawyers. This effectively puts an end to Lula's candidacy for the October 7th presidential election. And that means Fernando Haddad will take Lula's place alongside Manuela Dávila from the Communist Party Brazil as his vice presidential candidate. With Lula out of the race, the PT now has the job of transferring his support to Fernando Haddad, the former mayor of Sao Paulo and also a former Minister of Education during the Workers' Party governments. Another important point is that the polling firms have released projections without Lula in the race. In fact, these were done before the Supreme Court's decision was definitive. And the poll from Ibope puts in first place with 22% of voting intentions the far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro. Today, Friday, is Independence Day in Brazil with big demonstrations. On one side, we can expect those in favor of a return to military dictatorship to mobilize. On the other side, social movements celebrating the Day of the Excluded with their call for an independence that respects all those who are marginalized in society.
Ignacio Limas reporting there. Time for a short break. Join us in about 1 minute.
We are always there tracking the news. We seek equality. We defend the truth. It's a hard job, but we are not alone. We count on a new ally.
We are African. Culture and tradition is what we are born with.
We might be apart in terms of distance, but we are always together. We need to love ourselves.
Back to Africa.
Sunday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The International Monetary Fund has said that it wants to speed up talks on the $50 billion financing deal with Argentina. The announcement came after a meeting between the economic minister and the IMF chief. The country's peso and stocks have shored up since then. Economy Minister Nicolás Duhovny said he had enormous confidence that Argentina would be able to reach an agreement with the IMF. The agreement consists of an early release of the IMF loan following a sharp decrease in the value of the peso. Protests continue on the streets of Buenos Aires over the economic situation. Our correspondent Edgardo Esteban tells us more.
A protest took place in the capital city of Buenos Aires by various social movements due to the difficulties they are facing because of the lack of subsidies for social kitchens. They are also demanding their pensions that have been delayed. There was a very strong police operation here that caused tensions between the protesters and the police forces. Another topic that is also worrying is the small and medium-sized enterprises. Some 8,000 have closed down and 5,000 workers have been laid off. These companies are not able to sell their products due to the increase of the dollar and the crisis. This is creating alarm across the country that could increase in the next couple of days.
Every day, Argentina's currency crisis is pushing more and more. Bear with me, we seem to have some technical problems here. I'm just going to recap our top story for you while we get that sorted out. It's come up now. Right, so the currency crisis is pushing more and more small and medium-sized businesses to the brink. Thousands of businesses have been forced to shut down, and over 500,000 more are at risk.
The economic turmoil has left these businesses reeling. Many are shutting down each week. In fact, about 8,000 companies have been forced to close. And Macro's economic scheme isn't helping.
I have a lot of concern. The situation is very critical. Many factories have shut down. Others are going down the same path. There is a lot of concern about this government that took office in December 2015. Macri seems to have reversed any bit of progress made. That's why the economy can neither improve nor move forward.
It's a domino effect. Small and medium-sized enterprises provide employment, yet they are facing a challenge for survival. There is a lack of incentives from the state, high financing rates, and no profitability. This equals high levels of debt and payments that cannot be met.
Contraction of the demand, opening to more imports, and the high interest rates generate a serious situation, leading to the bankruptcy of SMEs, while others are obligated to let people go.
The strengthening of the dollar, the tariffs, and renegotiation with the IMF has put critical industries at risk. Over the last 2 years, there have been 85,000 layoffs.
SMEs are becoming today a problem in the terms of employment and production. It seems like the official politics are looking to purposely harm the productive system.
Inflation and the devaluation of the peso has put more than 800,000 small and medium enterprises at risk.
A minimum wage of $418 a month has been approved in Chile, but it doesn't come close to corresponding with the high costs of living there. And now the government's support for the free market model is under scrutiny given Argentina's economic crisis.
Chile is a country where many people have had a hard time to pay for fundamental services like health, education, housing, and water. Now, after weeks of discussion, the Chilean parliament has approved the minimum wage.
I work with bitterness for this minimum wage, hoping for future national projects where the government remembers that there is an organized social basis and that the promise of discussing these poverty amounts that we approve today must be fulfilled.
$418 for working a whole month. What can you afford with that in Chile?
I think we can't afford anything with this. It's very little for a person to try and live on. Minimum salaries must be over $580. It must at least cover minimum expenses like food, rent, and studies.
In the midst of this, it feels like the economic crisis in Argentina is creeping across the border. Argentina is Chile's 6th largest commercial partner worldwide. Where will the intentions of Mauricio Macri and Sebastián Piñera end, who in April of this year signed a series of agreements to promote commercial liberalization and an agenda of development? Economic experts warn of a reduction in exports, low tourism, and difficulty in achieving international agreements on a social level.
I think it will be the middle class who will get hit the hardest.
I think the middle class and the most vulnerable, which are the working class.
A scenario muddying the waters further is the allegation against the president for having received privileged information in the purchase actions of LAM Airlines in 2006, current LATAM. Today, the former president of Banchile says he has secret recordings that confirm it.
Those audio recordings exist, I have them, but the recordings have never been heard by anyone, and they won't be heard by anyone. A lot of people have talked about this, and I want to clarify it because it is important for the privacy of the people involved and the company that I represented.
In 2016, Sebastián Piñera was also tied to bribes that allowed LAM Argentina to begin commercial activities in Chile. These governments clearly shared the same vision and model of development, and now only time will tell if they're also destined to share an economic crisis.
As Costa Rica's deficit grows, it's shedding light on the impact of corruption in the country. More in this report.
With a fiscal deficit of more than 7% per year, the Costa Rican government is promoting a controversial new law in the Legislative Assembly and is promoting an increase in taxes.
We all would like to earn more money, but we must face our reality. Without adjustment, the situation will get worse.
All of the executive administrations of the past decades were involved in corruption scandals, including Caja Fiscal, Ice Alcatel, La Trocha Cruzitas, political campaigns, and China's cement. Corruption is also one of the reasons for the reduction in public funds.
I
believe that the Costa Rican former president's corruption cases had a great effect on us. It removed the blindfold from our eyes.
According to an expert in international transparency, sanctions are one of the main problems in the fight against corruption.
Effective sanctions are one of our main weaknesses. Many of these cases end with judicial dismissals because they are very difficult to corroborate.
In the last decade, more relevant accusations have reached the court, and for those that do, typically don't face sanctions.
The district attorney's office could not have had enough clues at the moment to prove them guilty.
The cost of corruption doesn't only have monetary consequences. It can also affect public trust in institutions.
Every time there's a corruption case, the trust and credibility in the public institutions decreases. Citizens still feel resentful regarding corruption cases.
Citizens from Central America have a medium to high perception of corruption, according to international transparency reports. Corruption has involved not only the prominent former president's case, but also private companies and citizens themselves.
Trinidad and Tobago's unions are going ahead with Friday's one-day national strike. Union leaders met with the Prime Minister on Thursday to discuss halting the closure of the state oil refinery. The government said the unions came with no new proposals, so they've agreed to disagree. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has asked public servants to let good sense prevail. Ministers had previously threatened certain workers with legal action if they took industrial action.
So the government is not overly concerned. That is a call that the union leaders have made. Their members will decide what they want to do. If they want to adhere to the call, we are ready, and that is the position of the government.
Teachers in Guyana are heading back to the classroom after a 4-day strike there. There was no agreement reached after a 2-hour meeting at the Department of Labor. Now the dispute between the Guyana Teachers Union and the government will go to arbitration. Whatever agreement is reached in arbitration will be binding on both sides. A group of Paraguayan citizens have protested against the decision to move their embassy in Israel from Jerusalem back to Tel Aviv. About a dozen people gathered outside the residence of President Mario Abdo on Thursday, holding signs that read, "You offended God." President Abdo has defended his decision, saying it's part of an effort to support lasting peace in Israel. Israel responded by ordering the closure of its embassy in Paraguay. A U.S. Navy plane has arrived in Ecuador as part of the bilateral security agreement signed with the United States. Many analysts question how this partnership will affect Ecuador's sovereignty.
Ecuador's Defense Minister Osvaldo Jarrín and Interior Minister Maria Paula Romo welcomed the United States Navy plane in Guayaquil. The U.S. Navy flyovers are part of the military cooperation agreed between the two countries.
The P-3 Orion airplane allows us to strengthen our monitoring, surveillance and detection operations, not only for transnational crimes, like drug trafficking, but different types of transnational crimes.
For some security experts, the current government's proximity to the U.S. government and its military institutions has raised concern. According to the analysts, the U.S. Navy flyovers over Ecuador's airspace violates the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
This airplane has the capacity to carry missiles, bombs, etc. So this is not just an intelligence airplane. That's what our main concern is. The government said it was going to be only for intelligence and data collection purpose. So why is it equipped to carry bombs and fully capable of striking?
After several violent attacks on the northern border of Ecuador, the government decided to sign a military cooperation deal with the U.S. The government also decided to invite the U.S. Office of Security Cooperation.
We must ask ourselves what Ecuador's role will be in the policy the U.S. is developing towards Venezuela and its government. I think a policy is being consolidated in the Andean region, and Colombia's role is very important due to its long tradition of military intervention in regional politics, especially now that Duque is leading the country.
After the arrival of the U.S. Navy plane, several analysts and security experts have decided to form an organization that will closely analyze the bilateral agreement. Meanwhile, opposition and social organizations have called for a protest on 13th of September in Quito to condemn the latest economic measures and foreign policies implemented by President Lenin Moreno. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Quito, Ecuador.
A 6.6 magnitude earthquake hit Ecuador on Thursday night. The epicenter of the quake was located nearly 10 kilometers from Cumandá in the province of Chimborazo. The quake was also felt here in the capital Quito, in the coastal port of Guayaquil and other cities. There are reports of some damage in central provinces. Other earthquakes hit Latin America within minutes of this one, of 5.9 magnitude in Panama and another of 5.8 in Chile. Social movements in Colombia report that 300,000 people have been affected by the Hidroituango Dam. In May, construction had to be stopped and thousands of people were evacuated as the dam was in risk of bursting. Social leaders warn that those behind the disaster are attempting to avoid responsibility. Next week, citizens of Ituango plan to mobilize to demand the controlled dismantling of the dam. Time for another short break. Join us very soon.